In the world of pro wrestling, there are moments where just hearing the news is enough to give fans goosebumps. These comebacks feel like they were born to become legendary. Huge names, a glorious past, the perfect stage, and sky-high expectations. But not every return gets a happy ending. Some are mishandled, told through the wrong story, or simply happen at the worst possible time, turning a dream into a hard-to-swallow disappointment. Today, we're looking back at the comebacks that should have been amazing, but went off the rails. And now, let's get started. Wrestling Sphere, go! Number 11. Roddy Piper. Roddy Piper was the kind of character who could walk out and instantly make an arena feel like it couldn't breathe. He didn't need monster muscles or flashy tricks. Piper's real weapons were his mind, his mouth, and that "I'm here to cause chaos" energy. In the 80s, he was one of those guys the crowd loved to hate, but couldn't look away from. Then, after that golden era, Piper slowly drifted away from the spotlight, leaving this feeling that if he ever got one last proper WWE run, it had to be a perfect close. Tight, intense, and unforgettable. Then 2003 arrived, and the opportunity was right there. But everything took a strange turn. At WrestleMania 19, during Vince McMahon vs. Hulk Hogan, Piper suddenly showed up as a nostalgia bomb. The pop was real, even if the appearance felt a little like it came out of nowhere. Instead of using that moment to plug Hot Rod into something worthy of his legacy, WWE pulled him into a messy, confusing orbit around Hogan, who, unbelievably, was running around under the Mr. America disguise. It sounded wrong on paper, and it looked even worse in execution. The worst part wasn't that Piper came back. It was that he returned in a setting that made everything feel cheaper. Piper was a promo master. Every line had a sting, every look felt like he was pouring gasoline. But this time, that sharpness wasn't placed where it could matter. The whole vibe came off like an old tape that had faded and warped, loud, offbeat, and so weird it was hard to believe this was how they were using a legend. And then Piper's final major singles match in WWE ended with him losing to Mr. America at Judgment Day, an ending that felt flat and reeked of, why did we do this? It wasn't the kind of loss that elevated the other guy or made the story stronger. It felt like a slow stumble that turned what could have been a triumphant return into something people wanted to forget. Piper would still pop up here and there afterward, just enough to make fans cheer out of love and pure nostalgia. But the magic that once made him Roddy Piper never fully returned again. And that's how a comeback that should have been the perfect goodbye became an awkward detour in the legacy of one of the greatest loudmouth geniuses the business ever had. Number 10. Jake Roberts. Jake the Snake Roberts had been away from the WWF long enough that fans started remembering him in the best possible way. A living nightmare who barely spoke, but still made your skin crawl. Just walking out with that python was enough to make an entire arena feel uneasy. So when he returned in 1996, on paper it should have been a perfect nostalgia hit. WWE didn't need to make Jake a champion or throw him into the main event scene. All they had to do was bring back the darkness, the half-whisper, half-threat delivery, and that constant sense that whatever was in his head was scarier than any move he could hit. But WWE looked at Jake, and chose to do almost the exact opposite. Physically, he wasn't old by age. 41 isn't supposed to be the point where you vanish. But when Jake came back, he looked like he'd lived a whole different lifetime. Slower, heavier, and missing that sharp edge in every step. Fans might have forgiven that if he still had the eerie character that made him famous. The problem was, he wasn't the Snake anymore. Roberts returned and became a born-again preacher. Even saying it out loud sounds off. Watching it felt even more out of place. The sinister aura that used to be his greatest weapon was stripped away completely, replaced with a moralizing, sermon-style gimmick that left people unsure whether they were supposed to be scared, annoyed, or just confused. That comeback did end up touching history, but in the one way a legend never wants, as the launching pad for Steve Austin at King of the Ring. It was a huge moment, and Jake's reputation helped make it feel heavier. The shame is that after that, everything quickly slid into a run where he became the butt of jokes, not only because of the faith-based direction of the character, but also because Jake in the ring simply wasn't effective enough at that point to generate any real momentum. The result was a return that felt dull, scattered, and easy to forget. Except for that one massive push it provided. Jake lasted a little over a year before being released, and that was that. No big final chapter. No worthy closing scene. Just this lingering sense of regret. A legend came back, and it should have given everyone goosebumps. but instead it turned into a weird section of the story that people just want to fast forward through. Number 9. Trish Stratus. Trish Stratus was the kind of women's star who could walk out and instantly make the whole show feel upgraded. She wasn't just an icon of an era. She was the person who forced the audience to admit this wasn't a side attraction anymore. This was someone who could carry the spotlight. So when Trish basically wrapped up her career in 2006 after a match with Lita at Unforgiven, it felt complete. The right goodbye, in the right place, with the right emotion. In the years that followed, she'd show up once in a while for a fun tag match or a quick cameo, just enough to remind everyone the legend was still there. But in 2011, WWE brought Trish back again, this time for WrestleMania. On paper, it sounded like a layup. The biggest stage of the year, a returning icon, the crowd roaring, clips everywhere online. It should have been a tribute moment. She's back, and she's still her, kind of deal. The problem was, Trish returned at a time when WWE was busy handing the spotlight to other people. The Rock had just come back and was sucking all the oxygen out of the room, and as if that wasn't enough, there was also Snooki. Yes, Snooki. Just hearing the name tells you how far off track the tone had gone. Instead of a legend returns to light up WrestleMania, it felt like Trish was dragged into a celebrity wrestling mashup where she wasn't the focal point. She was basically a prop to help the match go more viral. And if you think that alone made the comeback feel weaker, there's one more detail that made the whole thing memorable in a weird way. After the win, John Morrison didn't hug Trish. Not because of some deep storyline, because in real life, his girlfriend at the time, Melina, wasn't happy that Trish was on the show instead of a full-time women's wrestler. Basically, if you need someone, why isn't it me? So Trish's return, by a former women's champion, ended up buried under noise that didn't belong anywhere near her legacy. Rock, Snooki, backstage drama, and distractions fans don't want to remember when they think about Trish Stratus. Not long after, she was gone again, leaving the same empty feeling. A legend came back for WrestleMania, but the audience walked away without that satisfying wow you're supposed to get. Trish deserved more than that, and that's the entire problem. Number 8. The Ultimate Warrior. In 1996, the WWF was stuck in an awkward transition period. The roster had talent, new faces, and people with real potential to become the foundation, but most of them weren't truly over in that rabid, can't-look-away way yet. The company needed a jolt, something familiar but attention-grabbing to pull eyes back in. So they brought the Ultimate Warrior out of the wilderness, and in theory it was a smart move. The pitch was simple. Bring back an icon from the boom years, create buzz, and use that aura to light a fire under the next generation that was still trying to find its place. But in wrestling, theory and reality can be galaxies apart. When it actually happened, this comeback didn't just fall short, it became a long slide where nobody really benefited, except Warrior himself. He came back, the money still flowed, but the story had no life. Warrior just didn't fit the new atmosphere anymore. Fans were starting to crave something grittier, realer, with more attitude. They wanted danger. They wanted depth. They wanted promos that went somewhere. Warrior. He walked out like time had frozen, exactly the same as before. The energy, the yelling, the sprinting around. But now it all looked ridiculous. And it's not like the business couldn't evolve. Guys like Hogan and Undertaker would later reinvent themselves to survive shifting eras. Warrior basically didn't. His promos were long, messy, and bloated with made-up words, like he thought shouting louder automatically made it deep. And then you get moments that make you unsure whether to laugh or sigh. Distressicity. Yes, distressicity. It sounded like someone dropped a dictionary, picked up random pieces, and glued them together. At a time when WWF needed sharpness, Warrior showed up as pure static. He lasted about 3 months, then did the thing everyone feared when signing Warrior. He pissed off the boss. The end result was a quick, Mania-style match that didn't have the time or substance to elevate anyone, and it didn't create a memory worth keeping either. It felt more like an overhyped cameo than a meaningful comeback chapter. Then Warrior disappeared again, leaving the same floating question. What was the point of any of it? And the most brutal part? This run was so bad that it somehow made Warrior's later WCW stint look like it had actual effort behind it. And when less terrible is the compliment, you already know how ugly it really was. Number 7. The Dudley Boys. Bubba Ray and Devon came back to WWE after nearly a decade away, and the first feeling wasn't, "Whoa, the legends are back." It was more like, "Okay, now what?" Because this is the Dudley Boys, one of the greatest tag teams to ever turn chaos into an art form. Back in the day, they didn't even have to touch a table for the crowd to rise to its feet. They had a way of making a standard tag match feel like rhythmic violence, storytelling through screams, timing, and the sound of wood exploding. So in theory, their return should have been a major boost for the tag division. Credibility, experience, and just enough brutality to give any opponents instant heat. But in reality, it was so bland you almost wanted to put yourself through a flaming table just to stay awake. They returned, got a big pop, the first few weeks were fun, and then you could practically see management's expression, what do we do next? Instead of giving the Dudleys a long-term story, building new rivalries, and creating modern tag wars with real stakes, WWE took the easiest route, nostalgia mode. So we rewound time yet again for an ECW reunion that felt like it was already on episode 743. The Dudleys teamed with Tommy Dreamer and Rhino to face the Wyatt family. On paper, that sounds like violence. In practice, it played out like a themed attraction instead of a feud that mattered. It didn't make the Dudleys feel dangerous again, and it didn't clearly elevate the Wyatts either. It was the definition of both sides showing up, doing stuff, and leaving without anyone gaining anything that lasted. That one-year run passed like a blurry montage. No all-time tag classic. No signature moment that made you think, yeah, bringing them back was worth it. Even the little bit of heat Gallows and Anderson got by attacking the Dudleys on the way out got wiped out by WWE itself, turning it into a "we used to do this too" wink-wink segment. A proper send-off beating should have felt bitter, like a handoff, like, this is the new era. Instead it became quick fan service, and by the next day, nobody cared. And that's the worst part, the Dudley Boys didn't fail because they were bad. They failed because they were used like a prop. Sometimes it's better to leave fans wondering, what if the Dudleys came back the right way? Than to watch them stumble around like a modern-day tag team version of the Ascension, big names, real history, and a present that feels empty. If that comparison makes even a little sense, then you get what I mean. Number 6. Bret Hart. Bret "Hitman" Hart, the best there is, the best there was, the best there ever will be, returned to WWE in 2010, 13 years after leaving because of the Montreal Screwjob. And just hearing that should have screamed blockbuster. Because Bret vs. Shawn Michaels wasn't some casual storyline beef. There was real-life heat there, heavy and long-lasting, the kind where simply putting them in the same shot could sell an entire show. WWE had a rare gift, a story that basically wrote itself, heated itself up, and tightened the crowd's stomach on its own. But instead of letting it simmer, instead of making Bret and Shawn truly face what happened, WWE took a shortcut, wrapping it up with a hug. A hug isn't automatically wrong. The problem is it happened like someone wanted to check the box and move on. 13 years of anticipation got compressed into a few minutes of smooth, tidy reconciliation that somehow felt hollow. Everyone understood Bret couldn't wrestle. But he still could have been priceless. A leader, a mentor, the head of a new Hart Foundation against an older, faded D-Generation X, turning his return into a generational war. Instead, WWE turned Bret into a checklist of segments. Show up, say a few lines, cut to the next thing. The peak of it was the match with Vince McMahon at WrestleMania 26. Calling it a match is generous. It was basically a long, dragged-out revenge skit, with Bret swinging a chair on Vince until it stopped feeling cathartic and started feeling awkward. It didn't make Bret look dangerous, and it didn't deepen the story, it just made everything strange. After that, Bret would appear occasionally, get a pop, wave, and disappear without leaving anything meaningful behind. In other words, a massive return that had been building for 13 years, something that should have been a grand final chapter, got handled in one night. Clean, smooth, and worst of all, painfully ordinary. Number 5. Ricky Steamboat. Just saying Ricky Steamboat instantly brings fans back to something that feels pure. Silky technique, beautiful pacing, and a babyface you could actually believe in. A year after helping deliver one of the most replayed matches of all time at WrestleMania 3, Steamboat left the WWF for WCW, where he proved he wasn't a one-night wonder, but a classic making machine, especially opposite Ric Flair. In other words, if anyone came back to the WWF in the early 90s who should have been welcomed like gold, it was Steamboat. And then 1991 came, and he returned. It sounded huge. In reality, it felt like a swap nobody warned you about. Because the man who walked out wasn't Ricky Steamboat the way the audience knew him. They stripped away the core, the hard-working family man image, the calm presence, and that aura of good guy, but dangerous in the ring. Instead, the WWF shoved him into a new shell, the Dragon. Not as an added nickname, more like they were trying to erase Steamboat from the audience's memory entirely. Even worse was how the show treated him. The announcers often talked as if this was a completely different character, barely acknowledging that the crowd was looking at the same guy who had been shining just a few years earlier. And once you've already made fans confused about who is he, you throw on an over-the-top cape that kills whatever seriousness is left. But the final twist is what really makes people stare. Steamboat could now breathe fire. Yes, breathe fire. A gimmick that, just hearing it, makes you feel like his entire technical legacy got turned into a cartoon prop. The result was a return that barely got any real runway. He had just one pay-per-view match, never got placed into a meaningful title picture, and there was zero since the company was building him as a pillar. On paper, Steamboat could have been the second major babyface behind Hogan, a technical counterweight, a different kind of heroic standard, something the roster badly needed. Instead, the WWF let him drift by like set dressing. The flame of the Dragon died fast in the WWF, and about a year later Steamboat went right back to WCW. Not because he had no value, but because WWE chose to turn a gem into a stage accessory. And that's the kind of comeback that makes you ask, what exactly did they think they were doing? Number 4. Alberto Del Rio. Alberto Del Rio had everything WWE usually loves in a made star. Smooth talker, expensive swagger, a rich playboy vibe that felt like it carried its own spotlight. The problem was WWE kept pushing him and then pulling back, giving him chances and then yanking the rope, until Del Rio hit that "I'm not sitting here waiting anymore" point. After a racially charged backstage incident made things even uglier, he moved on, tried other places, refreshed his image, and looked for his motivation again. But right around then, WWE hit a star shortage, looked around, saw holes they needed to fill, and suddenly brought Del Rio back like nothing had ever happened. On paper, it sounded like a return that could help both sides. In reality, it fell apart from the opening seconds, because WWE didn't bring Del Rio back as the version that actually worked. The arrogant, classy, dangerous rich guy, someone you loved to hate, but couldn't stop watching. Instead, they shoved him into awful comedy, cheap material that felt like a rewind to the worst kind of dirty jokes from his old Ricardo Rodriguez days. Stuff that wasn't funny, just uncomfortable. Then came the pairing with Zeb Coulter to form Mex America. At a glance, the idea of bringing Mexico and America together could have been a positive message. But WWE presented it in a backwards way. In Vince McMahon's world, a unity slogan somehow turned into a reason to make them heels. So Del Rio got trapped in a character that was both off-tone and confusing, claiming he wanted connection, while being booked like a guy who was there to divide people. That kind of contradiction doesn't create heat. It makes the audience unsure whether to boo along or just tune it out. Before he could recover, he was shoved into the League of Nations, where Del Rio became the fourth most important member, meaning he was there, he got TV time, but he always lived on the edge of the frame, always the guy used to eat the pin when needed. A true high-paid jobber, a known name, real history, star money, but a role built to make other people look stronger. No long-term direction, no defining feud, no sense WWE actually wanted to fix what they'd wasted the first time. And within a year, Del Rio had enough again. He left, again, leaving behind a pretty bitter conclusion. WWE already had a right version of Del Rio sitting there. All they had to do was flip the right switch. Instead, they cooked the recipe wrong and acted surprised when the meal tasted bad. For Del Rio's sake, and honestly for everyone's sanity, if he wanted to unite the world, he probably needed to do it somewhere else. Number 3. Kevin Nash and Scott Hall. Together, Kevin Nash and Scott Hall pulled off something not many people ever do. They made wrestling look cool again. In 1996, they jumped from WWF to WCW and brought exactly the rebellious energy fans were craving. Like these two guys had just walked straight out of the backstage area onto the show, uninvited, unsmiling, and basically saying, "We're taking over." From that moment, everything exploded, history got rewritten, and the NWO became a symbol that even casual fans understood. So when WCW collapsed in 2001, the idea of Hall and Nash coming home to WWE sounded like a dream. A reunion on the old turf with money-printing potential. Dream matches everywhere, old rivalries ready to reignite, fans willing to buy tickets just to hear the entrance theme. Then the wish came true, in a way that made you want to take the wish back immediately. At first, the NWO reunion was genuinely exciting. But that excitement was like fireworks. Loud, bright, and over fast. Once the initial, "Oh my God, they're really back!" glow faded, the group started sagging like an old jacket stretched past its limit. Hogan left the group right at WrestleMania, and the biggest pivot point of the NWO instantly lost its center. Nash got hurt before he could do anything meaningful, turning any long-term plans, if they existed, into scraps. And Hall. The only notable pay-per-view match he had during that run was against Bradshaw, which already tells you this didn't feel like NWO invades WWE to cause chaos. Then Hall got released, and it happened so quickly the audience barely had time to adjust to the fact that he was even there. And just like that, so much potential evaporated. All the dream matches people thought were coming, all the stories that could have run for a year, all the money WWE could have made off that one NWO logo. It disappeared like it never existed, leaving the feeling that this wasn't a homecoming, but a tour that got its power cut halfway through. And it didn't stop there. Years later, Nash had another eye-rolling WWE return when he got thrown into the CM Punk, Triple H storyline with the Hole, who texted my phone. Nonsense. Something so out of place it made Nash feel less like a valuable character and more like a cameo that wandered onto the wrong set. Hall never wrestled for WWE again. And if it weren't for the legendary Hogan vs. The Rock moment making everyone forget the rest for a minute, the NWO run in WWE would probably be remembered as the perfect example of this truth. Sometimes the best dream is the one that never becomes real. Number 2. Sting. Sting is the kind of name that, the moment you hear it, fans automatically switch into fantasy booking mode. For years, people imagined every scenario. Sting versus Undertaker, Sting sharing the frame with WWE icons, Sting walking in and changing the entire vibe of the show just by moving slowly down the ramp. So when he showed up at Survivor Series 2014 to interfere in Team Cena versus Team Authority, the feeling was real, finally. His mere presence sold emotion. And then WWE did what they so often do with big stories. They turned it into a presentation, with themselves holding the remote. Instead of letting Sting be Sting, mysterious, cold, heavy, showing up rarely but leaving a stamp every time, he got dragged into the WWE versus WCW pipeline, like Sting's job was to represent a war that had been dead for years. And the moment you turn a legend into a walking history lesson, you strip away what made him special. Life, danger, unpredictability. The peak of it was Sting's first WWE match at WrestleMania 31 on March 29, 2015, against Triple H in a no disqualification match. On paper, it should have been a grand arrival, the last icon of WCW stepping onto the biggest stage. But the story was told like a nostalgia party taken too far. DX ran in, then the NWO ran in, and the crowd reacted more to the memories than to Sting himself. What should have been Sting's match turned into a match about everything around Sting. And the cruelest part is how the ending felt like WWE checking a box. Yep, that chapter is closed. Sting lost, shook hands, and everything moved on so quickly it felt empty. Sting wasn't the problem. WWE was. They took a comeback that should have been legendary and turned it into a history recap, where Sting stood in the middle of the shot like an expensive prop. Number 1. Goldberg. Goldberg is the hardest hitting on switch in modern wrestling. Flip it, and it explodes. No long explanation required. So when WWE brought Goldberg back in 2019 for a dream match in Saudi Arabia, it sounded like pure, perfect nostalgia. Super Showdown 2019, opponent, The Undertaker, on June 7, 2019. Just putting those two names side by side made it easy to imagine a clean, violent, unforgettable finish. Unfortunately, sometimes a dream becomes real in the exact way you wish it never had. The match felt rushed from the opening bell, like both men were trying to sprint straight to the Goldberg formula. Spear, pressure, finish. But then everything jumped the tracks when Goldberg crashed into the ring post, busted his head open, and was later described as having suffered a concussion. From that moment on, the pacing turned into a string of awkward, mistimed, wobbly sequences, where the aura wasn't building, it was leaking away. This is the kind of match you don't even need to hate. You just feel bad watching it. Undertaker and Goldberg never needed a long technical classic. They needed something safe, tight, and emotionally on point. Instead of hit hard and close the book, it became a situation where every passing minute made you more worried something worse was about to happen. Undertaker won, sure, but what stuck wasn't greatness. What stuck was one question: why did they let it happen like this? And that's how a comeback that should have been one last piece of candy for nostalgia fans became the perfect reminder that not every dream match should ever become a real match. So which comeback on this list disappointed you the most? Drop your pick in the comments so we can talk about it. And if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, subscribe to Wrestling Sphere, and hit the bell so you don't miss the next round of behind-the-scenes countdowns.